quizzes. You'll still have a quiz every week, those last 4 weeks, and then we'll get together at your final exam. Well, you'll get together here at your final exam, and it will be proxied by Professor Burns. So Dr. Burns will be here, proxying your exam during the final, which will be good. And your final exam, just a reminder again about the final. And I'll probably email you guys at some point with some review files just to be helpful with your final. But your final exam will be the same format as your midterm. So it'll still be some IDs and some matching and focus on terms.
Is that going to be during finals week or like the last day?
It'll be during your final exam slot. It won't be any longer than your midterm, so it really shouldn't take you guys more than 6 rounds. But it's the full, when you have full exam time. So any other questions that I can answer before we fly out through photography? So on Monday we looked at sort of the history, the development of photography, mostly talking about the work being done by Niepce and Daguerre, and then also William Fox Talbot as the major figureheads of the development of the daguerreotype and of the calotype. Daguerreotype mania, or daguerreotypomanie, as they call it in French, was this real obsession that happens over the daguerreotypes. The daguerreotypes are really exciting innovation that people get really excited about, especially when it comes to portraiture. And so there's like this craze of buying and selling and making daguerreotypes. By 1840, we have portrait studios established in the United States, in New York, and in Philadelphia. People are just really obsessed with daguerreotypes. It's the first time that portraits could be made cheaply. Before this, you'd have to hire an artist who would spend hours and days and months making a portrait of you, which would then cost you a lot of money. Whereas the daguerreotype could be made in 30 seconds, or at least you'd be sitting there for 30 seconds. They're very quick, and they could be very cheaply done in relationship to painting, or compared to painting. And so it's considered a democratizing of portraits, that it could be available to a wider audience and a lower class audience at that. The daguerreotype mania becomes especially prominent in the United States. The picture you're looking at refers to that obsession in France. But in fact, the obsession with the daguerreotype lingers in America for much, much longer than it does in France. And that has to do with the development of other types of photography, which catch on quicker in France. But so many photographers buy the equipment to set up daguerreotype studios in America that they're not willing to adopt new techniques because they have the equipment for the daguerreotype, so why would they learn this other technique? So we see it really sticking around in America for a lot longer. Matthew Brady is one of the better known daguerreotypists in the United States. He's especially known for his portraits of society figures, which he would display in galleries. He set up called it a Daguerrean miniature gallery, so a daguerreotype gallery in New York City, where he would show his portraits. And this particular portrait of Lincoln was accepted into the National Portrait Gallery, the first photograph accepted in the National Portrait Gallery in 1860. It is a salted paper print carte de visite, A carte de visite is a type of image that is done sort of like the size of a baseball card. Like if you picture like a trading card or baseball card. They were very popular as cards that you would leave when you would go to visit someone and they weren't home. You would leave a carte de visite so they didn't know you'd been there. And it becomes really fashionable to have your photograph attached or put onto carte de visites because the daguerreotype process did not allow for multiples. You couldn't reproduce the image. Every picture, every one of your carte de visites was slightly different. So you might have 20 photographs taken and 20 carte de visites made. And so those 20 pictures would be all slightly different. Maybe you blinked in a couple of them, maybe you were kind of squinting or something. They're all a little bit different. And so, of course, you pick the best ones to share with your closest friends or people you want to impress, whatever the case may be. But they were very highly prized, and they were traded, much like trading cards are today. People were collecting.
Can you say again what exactly the carte de visite is?
So the carte de visite is the small card that you would leave when you would go to visit someone.
Like a business card, but just like
Kind of like a
picture.
business card, but it would have your picture on it. Yeah. And it's only a short period of time that it's popular to have them with photographs. Before that, carte de visites were handwritten. You just leave your name on a piece of paper. You might have fancy paper or whatever. But you would just leave your name as a sign that you've been there. But with the advent of photography, it becomes really popular to use the photographs for them. Matthew Brady also displayed his work at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. And it's when he goes to London that he learns a new process called the wet collodion process, where you use a wet glass plate and expose it directly to your camera. The beauty of the wet collodion process is that it allows you to make the image almost immediately. So you take that wet plate, you put it in your camera, and then you immediately develop it as soon as you've taken the photograph. So you get these really quick prints. And it's the wet collodion process that he uses when he decides to photograph the Civil War. And he creates an entire photographic army of daguerreotypists that go into the Civil War. He teaches them all the collodion process, and they travel with various branches of the army. And so he has this team of photographers. So Matthew Brady, Alexander Gardner, Timothy O'Sullivan, who we see here, and John Reiki are all out following the war. But even though they're alongside the soldiers watching the events unfold, the photographic process is still not an instantaneous exposure. It still takes probably a minute or so to really expose your film to get an image, and that means that they can't do images that are action shots. And so when they follow the armies, they can't capture the battles themselves. So what do they capture? They capture images of life in the camps. So pictures of the soldiers sitting around having a meal or hanging out around their tents. And then they capture images of the aftermath of battle. And that's what we're looking at here, A Harvest of Death in Gettysburg. Matthew Brady really thought he was going to get rich off of these images from the Civil War that his team of operators created. He created a portfolio, essentially like a book. There were a certain number of editions of it, each one being different because these photos were not replicated, so each one is a unique artwork. And he intended to sell them as unique editions. And he thought he was going to get rich off of this. It does not work out that way for Brady. As soon as the war is over and he gets these together, no one wants to look at these images. I mean, they're grotesque. They are a reminder of the horrors that took place. There's the fear that you might see a loved one in one of these photographs. People don't want to see that. You know, they want to forget. And so he goes bankrupt from all the money he put into the process, and he ends up dying a pauper and being buried in a pauper's grave in New York City. So it does not work out well for him. But the photographs are still really interesting to look at. There are concerns about truthfulness when it comes to these images. Some of the photographers seem to have moved bodies to create compositions in their arrangement of bodies. And that's become more and more obvious as historians look at them and they can actually see like drag marks where bodies have been moved across the field to create certain arrangements for photographing. So there's a lack now. Now we see them as kind of lacking accuracy as well, which is the one thing that was really prized about them was that they were capturing that. So now it doesn't seem like they even really do that. A lot of people look into daguerreotypes and critique about how serious everybody seems to look in daguerreotypes. And this is true much more of American daguerreotypes than it is of European daguerreotypes. American photographers really encouraged their sitters to be still and to be frontal, and they set up very simple arrangements with dark backgrounds, and they preferred an image that sort of exuded honesty. They wanted the image to feel really truthful, and in order to do that, they felt like they had to eliminate emotion, and they had to eliminate any kind of sensitive qualities in the sitters. And so they preferred very straightforward, very still, very straight-faced looks, which gave them more crisp images, but also seemed more accurate to them. And so that becomes part of the American character of photography in the daguerreotypes, that they become these very still, very stiff, very formal images. And it's a little different in Europe. Some of the European artists, or European photographers, like Southworth and Hawes, who come from Europe but end up working in Boston, prefer something a little more artistic, and so their work tends to be a little more expressive. It is more reminiscent of romantic portraits that we see in painting. So they play around with lighting, they play around with poses, they play around with props to try and create portraits that are expressive. So this is actually a portrait of one of the photographers by one of the other photographers. But you can see how different this is from that American, very stiff, formal American view. As the processes become adapted very quickly, you'll notice the dates changing very, very rapidly in terms of processes. Within a few years, new chemicals are introduced that allow for more sharpness in the image, especially when it comes to the calotype. So Talbot's calotype, which allows for negatives, increases in its ability to be crisp and sharp in its images. And again, the calotype is using a negative, which can then be used to make multiples, which can be used to make books. And so we're looking here at an example of published photographs that are in the calotype process, which ends up being the salted paper print. And so you can see how far the calotype has come from that little lattice window that I showed you guys. It was really kind of hard to see. It looked like little rectangles. But now you can see how crisp these images have become. Here's an example of carte de visite before it's been cut. So you can see how different the poses might be, and how variable they might be. And certainly as a sitter, you probably have favorites that you would prefer to give to people that you would impress. So there's some variety here, and you would cut these up to hand out, again, when you go to visit someone. And then they become rather collectible. So there are two really popular formats in the 1860s. The carte de visite becomes incredibly popular among socialites, like this woman, but also among famous people. So famous people would have lots and lots of carte de visites made and sell them, kind of like today when you might get like an autographed photograph of a celebrity. They would have their photos done and people collected them. So they would actually make them for sale. So the carte de visite ends up being sort of that trading card for celebrities in that way. In addition to the popularity of the carte de visite, the other really popular type of photograph is called a stereograph. And this is a stereographic card. You're welcome to come check this out if you want in class. But stereographs were photographs, usually not of people or not of portraits anyways, but of places and events. And they would be published as a pair. So they were salted paper prints, they were calotypes. They would be published as two of the same photographs side by side, like you see here. And then you would buy glasses. You buy special glasses, and you insert this into the glasses, and then you look at it so that this eye would only see this image, and this eye would only see this image. And what happens is that your mind does what it does when it looks at a landscape. It combines those images, those flat images together, and makes them look 3D. They're essentially the first 3D glasses. Okay, so the stereoscope, or the stereograph, which ends up becoming the stereoscope, but the stereograph are these cards that you would insert into the stereoscope, and it would be like looking at a place in 3 dimensions. So it allowed you to feel like you were there experiencing the event or the landscape yourself. These are incredibly, incredibly popular. You can find stereographs very easily at antique stores still today, everywhere. They're highly collectible and traded, and the stereoscope continues to be made today, but now in children's toy versions. So as a child, you had a Viewmaster that had the clicking wheel. That's a stereoscope. Okay, and it allows you to see. Can you imagine? You know how when you click those things and you look through it, and you're seeing the same image out of each eye. They look like they come together and they look kind of 3D. Not like real 3D, but like kind of 3D. Like that's the stereoscope. So today's stereoscope is the Viewmaster. but they were very popular in the 1860s. Your textbook mentions, and so does the Deborah Johnson article, some comments by Charles Baudelaire, who is a very well-known art critic, and here is a portrait of him. And he writes about photography and his kind of disdain for it. He doesn't like photography. He identifies photography as part of the arts, and he believes that it is bad for art. He thinks that it is only appealing to the masses because it seems magical, and that the artists are being forced to represent images in a more realistic way. And so for him, it emphasizes realism, which he's not a huge fan of, and instead he thinks it's lowering the standards of art to accept photography as an art form. This is a pretty popular belief among critics of photography, that it does not allow for moral values to be taught in the way that painting and sculpture does, and is therefore lacking in the emotional and teaching opportunities that can be found in other art forms. They do recognize photography then more as a science, more as an industry, and as something beneficial more for documentation than for an art form. And that's pretty common viewpoint of this time. There are a handful of artists who really try to find a way to convince critics otherwise by doing things that imitate painting or sculpture. Ragelander, you're looking at here, is a good example of that. The Two Ways of Life, where he creates a combination print. So to create a print of this particular scale and shape, he has to overlap images as he exposes them. So it is made from negatives that have been exposed by overlapping to create a more complex, elaborate image. So it takes multiple negatives to achieve what he considers a more painterly effect. And he saw photography as having great possibilities in the arts because it could allow artists to experiment with composition before they painted, so sort of as a planning aid. But this particular piece he considers a work of art, and it is certainly meant to have moral value. The subject matter is looking at good and evil, so the sort of virtues and vices. As you look through the photograph, you see a variety of things happening, some of them which we would consider virtuous and some of them not. So virtues and vices, good and evil throughout the work. Robinson is another example of an artist who wants to pursue photography as an art form. Specifically, he was a pre-Raphaelite painter, and so that might not surprise you that he is choosing this very dramatic, romantic subject matter. Fading Away, which shows a young, very, very pretty young girl who is dying of what we assume to be either consumption, which is tuberculosis. And so she's dying, and then he dies looking out the window. Like he can't even stand to watch what's happening here. And so you have the emotional impact of the drama Romance is certainly implied. So adding some story, some narrative to it. The clarity of the image would have appealed to artists working in the realism movement who would have seen this as being very accurate and representing accuracy. At the same time, it makes them look really artificial because it's clear everywhere. Every little piece of detail, every person, every fold of the dress, every cloud in the sky is in very precise detail here. There's no blurring throughout the print, and so it does feel kind of artificial. That adds to that art unnaturalness of the image, which makes it look a little more theatrical, melodramatic. The alternative is the work of Julia Margaret Cameron, who realized that in order for photography to be identified as an art form, maybe it needed to look more like painting. And so she encourages her images to have lighting effects that cause blurriness. So it's not as clear. She ignores newer developments in technology and prefers a soft focus. So you have much less of the clarity in her images, much softer focus. She encourages movement, for example, in some of her figures to create some softening of the forms.
Is she American?
She is. She does refuse to retouch her photos, so she's not playing with her negatives in the same way that, say, Breslinger was, which helps her maintain some authenticity of her image, but she is encouraging that blurriness to compete with or be related to painting. So photographers really are working on a variety of ways to make their images compete with art painting by either competing subject-wise or competing in terms of technique. That they're trying to make their photos look more like paintings. Because this is seen as the biggest challenge when we're accustomed to seeing images, we're accustomed to seeing them as paintings in the 1860s, and so that is their biggest challenge, is to be compared to painting. And they need to be compared favorably in order to be seen as art. Alright, so the other thing I wanted to talk about today was your article. So the Deborah Johnson article you guys had for today talked about photography in Japanese print.